Hi, I'm DIYte. Last year I did a video showing you my favourite fixings from my day job as a curtain fitter. I've had some really good feedback and comments on that video. So what I thought I might do today is take that video one step further. I'm going to show you today what I think are the best plasterboard fixings on the market in the UK today. And not only that, I'm going to show you how and when to use them. So, selecting the best fixings from my fixing box. We've got quite a few fixings to get through in today's toolkit. So, first up I'm going to be featuring the spring toggle hollow wall anchor, in this case from Rule Plug. I've got two different sizes here, M3x50s and 5x50s. I'm actually going to be showing you the 5x50s, which need a 14mm drill bit. I'm then going to move on to hollow wall anchor, or sometimes called cavity fixings, for which we're going to need a setting tool and a 10mm diameter drill bit. After that I'm going to show you the increasingly popular Gripit fixings. In this case I'm using the yellow fixings, and for these we need a 15mm diameter drill bit. After that I'll be moving on to the UX6 and PD8 fixings from Fisher, which need an 8mm and a 6mm diameter drill bit. And finally I'm going to show you fixings to avoid like the plague, these dreadful metal self-drive plasterboard fixings, which I put a massive health warning on in my last video, and comments from you all since then have completely confirmed what I said. I've done a bit of research and I've looked into the loading capacities of all these different fixings. You can see these capacities now on the screen for the Raw Plug, Gripit and Fisher fixings. To be honest with you, they're not going to make a lot of sense to you. They're quite impenetrable. Some of them talk about kilonewtons, others talk about kilograms, and it obviously depends on the thickness of your plasterboard, etc, etc, etc. But you're probably looking at this video because you've got stuff to install in your house. So let's keep things simple. Bottom line, the heaviest duty fixings, as far as I'm concerned, are these guys, the spring toggles. And then you go down the spectrum. I think spring toggles, anchors, Gripit, they all come into the same category as medium to heavy duty in a home environment, at least, capacity. And then we're going to go a little bit further back, but still pretty good, to these UX6 and PD8 fixings. So these fixings I'm going to show you today are going to be your best bet for heavy stuff you're trying to install around the house. However, if you've got something really heavy you need to install, the best option is always to try and drill through the plasterboard into something solid behind the plaster. I did a video a couple of weeks ago showing you what to do if you hit steel just above the plasterboard, how to fix into that. Same thing goes, steel, wood, brick. If you can, you want to try and fix into that substrata, because at the end of the day, these fixings, good as though they are only as strong as the plasterboard that they're fixing into. So that is a bit of a limitation. Let's get started. I've got my piece of plasterboard to do the simulation with. First up, we've got the spring toggle from Rule Plug. For this we need a 14mm diameter drill bit. Right, the thing about this fixing is once you've installed it inside the plasterboard, you can't then take it out because the fixing will fall off. So you've got to put it through whatever it is you're installing. In this case I've just got a curtain bracket, and then push it through the plasterboard. Now the important thing about this fixing is you need about 35mm gap between the underside of the plasterboard and anything within the gap. So one way you can test is to put a screwdriver or something into the void through the hole you've just drilled to check that you've got the right amount of space. The reason this is important, as I'll demonstrate here, as you insert the fixing, it needs a certain amount of space before the fixing snaps open. Once that has opened, you can then start tightening the fixing up. So you see, as I tighten the fixing up, it tightens up to form an incredibly secure anchor behind the plasterboard. Now the reason that I've started with this fixing is I think this has got to be the heaviest duty fixing, because if you look here you've got a good 20mm of fixing spreading out either side of the hole on the other side of the plasterboard. Okay, so next up we've got the hollow wall anchor fixings. These come in a variety of sizes from 4x32mm to 5x65mm. Today I'm going to show you the 5x52 because I think this is a really good general size, but the size that you use really depends on the thickness of your plasterboard and how much space you've got behind the plasterboard. If you've got double thickness of plasterboard, you want to use one of these longer fixings, but in most homes plasterboard is likely to be single thickness like this, so one of these fixings will be absolutely fine. So for this fixing we need a 10mm diameter drill bit. Again, as with the toggle fixing, you need to make sure there's enough space behind the plasterboard for the fixing to be able to be fully inserted and then to open out. In this case it's 35mm again. If when you put your screwdriver in or your bit of wire, whatever it is, to test how much space you've got behind, if you haven't got 35mm behind the plasterboard, you might need to go with one of these smaller anchors like this 4x32, which you see when you insert in gives you a lot of extra space. So we insert the anchor into the hole we just drilled. Now the trick with this fixing, once you've inserted it, just unscrew the thread a little bit on the bolt. You then insert your setting tool and then start levering on the setting tool. And what this does is it starts to open the anchor on the inside of the plasterboard. Now the anchor is fully open. I can pull the lever to release the setting tool and you're left with this incredibly strong fixing which is jutting out 10mm past the edge of the hole at 5 points around the fixing. Flipping the plasterboard over, this is what you see on the underside. Now the beauty of this fixing, unlike the toggle, you can, if you want to, remove the thread to then fix your radiator or bracket or whatever it is back into the fixing. I love the fact that this fixing has such a large 10mm anchor projection inside the plasterboard and the fact that there are so many points opening out. So this is my second highest rated fixing. Okay, so next up we've got the Gripit fixing. Now, one of the things I like about the Gripit fixings is on their website they've got a section that you can click on which says which Gripit do I need. It then shows you the Gripit house and you can click on any particular application and it will explain to you which fixing would be the most appropriate. In today's video we're going to use the yellow 15mm fixing, but as you click around the house you can see, for example, on the bathroom fitting they're suggesting the 25mm. For a TV again they're suggesting the 25mm, and for a mirror 18mm, so it's a really good user-friendly app. Personally, I think it is a shame that some of the larger fixings need such a wide diameter hole drilled, because I think that the smaller the diameter hole, the stronger the fixing is going to be, because plasterboard is inherently a brittle material, so you want to minimise the diameter of the hole. We're going to drill the 15mm hole. So we've drilled our hole, we're now going to insert the Gripit fixing, and then you tap the fixing into place, and then you simply insert a screwdriver, this is actually a flat-headed SL5 bit, into the fixing, and as you turn it, the little lugs on the back of the fixing open out. And now, as we insert the screw that comes with the fixing, fixing tightens up against the underside of the plasterboard. So you see here the little metal wings are now pulling tightly against the underside of the plasterboard, again to create a really strong fixing. Now, Gripit might want to set me right on this, but the reason I'm featuring this fixing third after the anchor fixing is because whereas the anchor had a good 10 millimeters opening up inside of the plasterboard, this fixing, albeit it's only the yellow 15 millimeter fixing, but this only has a 5 millimeter projection inside of the plasterboard. So to my mind, this fixing has to be stronger than the Gripit. But crucially, where the Gripit scores much higher than the anchor fixing is that whereas the anchor fixing needed 35 millimeters of clearance inside the plasterboard, the Gripit fixing needs a measly 8 millimeters clearance. Even less than that if your screw hasn't stuck in as far as mine has. So this fixing is a fantastic fixing where you've got very little space to work with behind the plasterboard. Now I've got two more fixings to show you today, the PD8 and the UX6 from Fisher. The UX6 is going to be the first one I'm going to show you, partly because this is the fixing I tend to use most often on a day-to-day basis fixing into plasterboard on the curtain fitting jobs I do. And also because after my video last year I had a few people telling me horror stories about this metal screw-in fixing, what I sometimes call the helter-skelter fixing, which I'm saying you should never use, particularly for vertical downward loads. And from those of you who commented on my video, the UX6 fitting seemed to save the day for them where they'd had problems with this screw-in fixing. What I like about this fixing is it only requires a 6 millimeter diameter drill bit. And as I've been saying in this video, I think the smaller the hole you drill in plasterboard, the stronger the fixing is going to be. So I'm going to tap the fixing into position. You can see the fixing now on the underside of the plasterboard. And I've got my 4x50 millimeter screw. Inserting my bracket on the underside of the plasterboard. Watch what happens when the screw starts tightening up this fixing. This fixing is really clever because basically what it does is it knots up behind the plasterboard. You know that the fixing has finished doing its job when the screw goes tight, and what you're left with is this fantastic little knot behind the plasterboard, which has created a really secure fixing. So, last but not least, we've got the Fisher PD8 fixing. As the name suggests, you need an 8 millimeter diameter drill bit. Now what's clever about this fixing is it has a bullet that is driven up into the fixing when you tighten it up. So we're going to insert that into the plasterboard, tap it into place. Rather like with the UX6, where if you use anything more than a 4 or 4.5 millimeter diameter screw, the plug won't knot up properly. Again, with the PD8 you need a specific diameter screw, because the screw has to pass freely through the bullet, as you can see there, for the bullet to work properly. So I'm going to insert the screw. Like that. Now, watch what happens as we tighten the screw up. The bullet basically goes up into the fixing. You hear an audible click And again, when it goes tight, you know it's done its job. You see here we've got these 4 splayed sections that the bullet has forced apart as it's gone into the fixing, which again creates a really good secure fixing in the plasterboard. And the other thing I like about this fixing is, again, it doesn't need a huge amount of space behind the plasterboard. So including the screw, we're looking at about 25mm here. You can go down to as low as 20mm if necessary. Now, I said to you at the start of this video that I put a massive health warning on these screw-in plasterboard fixings. Often I call them helter-skelters. I've had enough bad experiences with these, and judging by the comments that you've all left after the last video I did, you've also had some pretty bad experiences with these. Let me show you what the problem is with them. Whereas the other fixings I've shown you today open up wings or anchors or some sort of a knot behind the fixing, which creates a really secure fixing. The only thing this thing does is it screws a thread through the plasterboard. Now, you think that would give you a really good fixing, but it doesn't, because plasterboard is brittle, and if you over tighten this, you've already lost the thread. Even if you don't over tighten this when you put it through the plasterboard, you only need a small amount of force for the fixing to pull straight out. So these things are self-drill. So as you see, it drills its own hole into the plasterboard. So you only have to have a limited amount of force applied to the underside of the plasterboard for that helter-skelter fixing to simply fall out. So I really hope you found today's video useful, and that I've given you some confidence that in your house you can put up whatever it is you need to fix to your plasterboard walls. Details of all the tools and fixings that I've featured in today's vlog will be available in the description tab at the end of this video. I'd love to hear what you think. Let me have your comments, and if you've got any questions about particular jobs you're doing, leave them at the end of the video and I'll be more than happy to get back. Finally, if you're new to this channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here.